Hello and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to share with you the latest additions to my mobile ham radio station. I'm a Rover now. Welcome back and thanks for being here. My name is Scott, and just when it seems I couldn't possibly stuff anything else into this tiny car, I find a way. Here's a cubby. I think I can fit a radio there. Oh, look, if I put this rack on, I can put more antennas on the car. And I just keep adding and adding and adding. And so, yeah, it never ends. In May, I shared a video. It's an overview of the mobile station here and the car's capabilities. I will link that up here in this corner. And this video, I'm going to try to make it about what I've added to that as far as capabilities go. I have taken an interest in VHF contesting. Contesting doesn't necessarily appeal to me, the competition part of it, but the communications exercise aspect of it is appealing to me. HF contesting can be pretty wild because basically you have people from all over the world trying to get into different stations, and as a mobile I can't necessarily compete with that, because there's so many powerful stations out there pushing out max power, max allowable power, which is 1500 watts. VHF, because there's not signals pouring in from all over the world all at once, there's more time between contacts, and I mean, unless there's a band opening, it's just slower going. It's a different grind. In my experience so far, I have done 2 contests. As I share about my contesting setup, I want to present 2 angles. First, I'm going to show you what I have going on in the car. I'm going to tell you a little bit about contesting if you don't know much about it. And as you watch, if you're an experienced contester, and especially if you're an experienced rover, I'm interested in hearing your feedback and perhaps some advice to help my success, because I so far have had very limited success, and some of that is my fault, some of it's my setup, and I'll show you why here in just a moment. VHF contesting takes place at 50 megahertz and higher. And so there are a lot of amateur band privileges between 50 megahertz or 6 meters that go all the way up into the microwaves. For that, in order to be able to be effective, I need horizontally polarized antennas. And for those of you who don't know, most of the time when you see antennas on a car or a vehicle like a police car, the antennas are pointed straight up in the air. So that's vertical polarization. And because single sideband activity, particularly from most portable and home stations, is horizontal, so they have antenna elements that are horizontally oriented or polarized, or maybe even a wire strung between trees that's usually horizontal, it's beneficial for me to have horizontally polarized antennas on the car. VHF contesting, the categories are broken down into smaller groups to make everybody able to compete on somewhat of a level playing field. That way, somebody operating on low power like myself isn't necessarily lumped into the same category as somebody running full legal power. So some of the categories in VHF contesting would include single operator, multiple operator, high power, which is up to 1500 watts, low power, which is up to 200 watts, and then QRP, which is really low power. That's only up to 5 watts. And believe it or not, some people really like to do that, the challenge of doing it. And then there's fixed stations, portable stations, and Rover, which is not necessarily always mobile. Because I am an all mobile and mobile only station, Rover is just a natural place for me to be. And so I decided to build a Rover setup. To define a Rover for contesting purposes, a Rover is a station that moves from Maidenhead grid to Maidenhead grid. And if you don't know, the world is divided into 324,000 Maidenhead grids. I, for example, am in Maidenhead grid square Fox Mike 17. And so a Rover is a station that operates from more than one grid square. So it doesn't matter if I'm mobile and moving around. If I don't leave my area and go to another grid square, then I'm not a Rover. So a Rover will often operate say on a line or an intersection where 4 grid squares come to meet. That's the easiest way to move from grid to grid. The benefits of working as a rover and with rovers is, in a contest, if I contact a station, that's it. I log them, and that's one contact, one QSO or QSO, and then I move on. If I happen to trip over that station later, it doesn't matter. That's a dupe, and it doesn't count. But if I leave my grid square and go to another grid square, contact that same person again, now I'm a new station for them, and they're a new station for me. And so working the corners, if you will, if I were to get to a corner and move to 4 corners, then that's 4 contacts with the same station. And I'm 4 different contacts for them as well. If I'm working with a team of rovers, if the 4 rovers are set up in one in each of the grid squares, I'm assuming we're working at a corner, then as we work all the stations that we can and we work each other, then we rotate, and then we do the same thing over and then rotate again, do the same thing over and then rotate again. That's 4 rotations, right? Because there's 4 of us, 4 grid squares, that's 16 combinations. And so each operator out there in fixed land or portable land, they now have 16 contacts between the 4 of us. And we also have the 16 combinations as well, plus everybody else that we work in the process. That's called grid circling, and it's legal to a point. I, as a limited rover, can do that up to 100 times with one station, so it almost seems dirty, but maybe not. I don't know. That's just the way the game is played, though. So let me talk about the rover categories. I mentioned that I'm working Rover Limited. The first and original one, I think, was probably Rover Classic or Classic Rover. That is basically a station where everything is contained within one vehicle, and it's not necessarily mounted to the vehicle, it's just contained within a vehicle. It can have 2 operators, an unlimited number of drivers, and full legal power, and all bands can be worked. This is from a Classic Rover. The limited rover is that's what I'm doing. The limited rover has limits. For example, the biggest difference is they work only the lowest 4 bands. So 50 megahertz, 144 megahertz, 222 megahertz, and 432 megahertz, which translated would be 6 meter, 2 meter, 1.25 meters, and 70 centimeters. Power is limited to 200 watts on 6 meters and 2 meters, and 100 watts on 1.25 and 70 centimeters. Again, limited to 2 operators, any number of drivers. But again, like the Classic Rover, everything has to be contained within the one vehicle. And although I have all my stuff mounted to the vehicle, that's not the limitation. A lot of rovers actually operate portable. They're just using a car to move from grid to grid. So everything's going to get packed into one car, and then you get to your next operating location. You break everything out, set up, operate for an hour or 2, tear down, and then move someplace else and start the whole process over again. The unlimited rover, that's the top class. And so sometimes they are mobile, but really, as I said, a lot of them are actually operating as portables. The unlimited rover does not have the same restrictions as the other 2 categories. So for example, unlimited number of drivers, unlimited number of operators. They can work all of the bands, max legal power, and they're not confined to just one vehicle. And so an extreme example might be 3 vans stuffed full of equipment. They drive these 3 vans to a location, unpack, set up towers, crank up masts, Yagis, high power amplifiers, the whole 9 yards, generators, they can do it all. They operate, then tear down, and then move someplace else. In my style of operating, let's see, there are 2 types of rovers when it comes to operating practice. There is what's called the point and shoot, which is basically they park, set up, and then they've got their Yagi beams pointing their antennas where they want to talk. And then there's what's called run and gun. And those are the ones who have a setup that they can operate while they're driving. And that's what I'm building. For now, I have loops on the roof that I can use as I drive, and eventually I will have Yakis on the roof that I can still operate while I drive. When you have a two-person setup, ordinarily, drivers, by the rules, drivers are not allowed to operate the radio when they're driving. But as a single operator, I can do all of the functions of the station, so I can drive and operate at the same time. And in my opinion, that's not very hazardous because I can just reach down, grab a microphone, and talk. It's not a big deal. I have over 25 years of experience doing that. The trick, though, comes when it comes time to log. Logging is dangerous while driving. And so if I'm on the move, I have this voice recorder here. It's a digital voice recorder, and I will record my conversations as I drive and then type it into a log later, probably after the contest is over with. And so that is my safety factor for logging while driving. All right, so I think I have said enough about the contest, the setup, a little bit of dive into what a Rover is and the rules. Let me give you a quick tour of what I have going on in here in the car as well as what's on the roof. So check this out. My basic radio setup consists of these two radios that you may have already seen in a previous video. This radio here on top is my Yaesu FT891, and for this contest I'm using it as a single sideband rig for 6 meters or 50 megahertz. It's currently running setup for FT8. Down here on the bottom is an ICOM ID5100 working the FM side of the house. And this side of the radio is monitoring the 2-meter FM national calling frequency, and sometimes I monitor 146.58 megahertz. And this side of the radio is monitoring the national calling frequency for 70 centimeters. Most of the time I have it monitoring 146.58 since it's more popular than 446. 5.2 and 5.8 are the two frequencies that I'm most likely to hear a call. Moving toward the middle of the car, you can see that I have my mapping software open. And this here is just Google Maps. And then down here I have Waze. Moving over to the desk, this is my old Yaesu FT857. You might recall that I used to have it in the car off over there where the 891 is currently mounted. And I use this radio for single sideband operations on 144 and 432 megahertz. And this will also be the exciter for a 222 megahertz transceiver in the future. Right now it's set up for FT8. In fact, I'm currently running FT8 simultaneously on 2 meters and 6 meters. Here are the microphones. This one is for the 891. This one is for the 857. The ID5100 is over there on the door, and you've seen that in a previous video. And here is my laptop. You can see that while I've been talking, I made an FT8 contact with N3MK. I contacted him earlier while I was in Virginia Beach, Grid Square FM26, and he's in FM27. And now I'm in FM17. So what I'll do here is click OK to log this contact, and then I'll enable the transmitter and let it run while I continue to record this video. There's more under the desk. That right there is a rotator controller, and I'll show you a better picture of that in a minute. That's for future growth, a day when I'll have a rotator and beams. And here you can see a pair of Rig Blaster digital interface. Having two enables me to run 2 sessions of FT8 at the same time. And here's my handheld transceiver. It's off right now, but I use it to monitor my favorite D-Star reflector when the ID5100 is busy on FM simplex frequency. The handheld accesses D-Star through an access point at the back of the car. Here is my temperature monitoring for the transceivers. You can see that I have my refrigerator running to keep some drinks cool. And up here you can see my microphone for YouTubing. I've shared this in another video. I have a digital voice recorder up here as well. I log my contacts on a laptop. However, that's way too dangerous to do while driving. So instead, I record my conversations on the road with this recorder, and then I log my contacts into a computer later. All right, that's the equipment that I have in the car. Let's take a look outside and I'll tell you more about the... Looks like I have an audience. All right, we'll let them watch. So here are the antennas, the contesting antennas. Actually, it's all of my antennas for 50 megahertz and higher. And so let me just go from front to back. This here is a 432 megahertz horizontal loop by M squared. And as the name would suggest, I use it for covering 432 megahertz. These are all horizontally polarized. Next is a 144 megahertz horizontal loop, and you can see I have a choke on it, and it is sharing a mount with this larger antenna above. This is a 6 meter or 50 megahertz horizontal loop, also by M squared. All of these are M squared. And then you're already familiar with the vertical that I have here in the back, as well as the WeBoost cellular amplifier. And my feed lines, I'm using LMR 240. Some folks will use the LMR 400. I didn't want to go that large and that expensive. The difference is really not that much on the runs that I have in my car. I think my longest run might be, when you string it all out, maybe 15 to 20 feet. And then they all go into the car through this panel that I made. And so this just rolls up into the window. It's shaped like the glass and rolls up into the window. And then I have pass-throughs. These are all type N connectors, which are waterproof. This one is reserved for future use. So currently they are 50 megs, 144 megs, and 432 megs. And later I will move this one to here, and then that'll become a 222 megahertz. My clearance to the highest point is 8 feet 1 inches, and so I'm able to get under most of my favorite drive-throughs. All right, so that's the car and what I have going on in here. And oddly enough, by the time you see this video, I'll probably have already made further changes to make it more effective. And when that happens, I'll do another update video to show you what I've done. For now, I'll just say that the car does have some limitations. For example, I do not have the 222 megahertz band in the car. And when I'm operating as a Rover Limited, working with 4 bands, I only have 3 of the 4 bands, so 25% is gone. So I do need to get 222 megahertz in the car, and I'm going to do that with a transverter. That one will be 100 watts, which is right at the limit for my category. And then speaking of power, I also don't have amplifiers in the car yet. And so I am allowed 200 watts on 50 megahertz, but my FT891 only outputs 100 watts. And so 100 watts compared to 200, yes, that sounds like a huge deficit, but it's not necessarily that bad, because it doesn't even amount to an S unit on the other end of the conversation. So yes, an amplifier will help, but it's not a huge priority on that band right now. On 144 megahertz, I'm operating at 50 watts. And when I'm allowed to have 200 watts and I'm only working with 50 watts, I can gain something by getting a 200 watt amplifier. And so I will do that. That should increase my signal by an S unit on the other end of the conversation. And so that is a worthwhile upgrade and will probably be one of my first pursuits. And then on 432 megahertz, my FT857 is old. And so back in those days, they did not put 50 watt transmitters in mobile rigs on UHF. And so my 857 only outputs 20 watts on 432 megahertz. And so that is a pretty substantial deficit. That one is another band that I will add an amplifier to. That will multiply my signal by 5 times, but the handicap doesn't end there. With my loops that are up on the car right now, they're not mounted as high as they could be. Height is important on these bands, And with these loops, I have cut them back down to where for my local driving, I can still fit through drive-throughs and things like that. So my overall clearance is about 8 feet. And I think I might have already shared that with you. Once I switch to Yagis, I've got a rotator in the works, a 6-foot mast, and then the Yagis. And so a 6-foot mast on the roof is going to have my max clearance at 12 feet. So my 6-meter antenna will be at 12 feet, and then a foot below for 432, a foot below for 222, and then a foot below for 2 meters. So that's higher than what I currently have. And so that'll be helpful, but also the gain is really where it's at. I mentioned that I have 20 watts available to me on 432. Well, the Yagi antenna that I'm looking to use is what's known as a Rover Special by Directive Systems. Those are the beams that I'm chasing for my VHF ones. So a PAR Moxon for 6 meters, which has some gain. I'm not going to say how much because I don't think it's terribly much, but it does have a front to back rejection ratio and some directivity, so it is a beam of sorts, but it's not a high gain beam. And then on the other 3 bands, I'm using Directive Systems, or I will. And so the Yagi for 432 megahertz has a gain of 13.5 dBd. And so that would effectively make my 20 watt transmitter output, the effective radiated power for that would jump up to around 400 watts. Once I'm putting 100 watts into that same antenna, then the effective radiated power jumps up from 400 to around 2,000 watts effective radiated output power, and that's a huge benefit. And the Yagi will also give me the ability to hear better as well. So right now I'm missing signals because I cannot hear them just yet. So I think the Yagis will benefit me in both directions, and the Yagis on the lower bands will also provide gain, not 13.5 dB, but it's 11.5 dB on 222, and then 10.5 dB on 2 meters. But still, if I'm putting out 200 watts with 10 dB, that's still 2,000 watt ERP. And so I am severely handicapped by not having amplifiers and antennas in the car. Now the antennas are where it's really at. That's where I'm going to get the most benefit. So I am going to get the antennas before I get the amplifiers, but the amplifiers will come. Something else that plays into this is a part where I'm looking for some advice. I operated near Louisa, Virginia, and that is the convergence of Grid Square's FM 07, 08, 17, and 18. And what I don't know is if Louisa is just a black hole, because there's not a lot of elevation right there. So I might not have been getting out very far. It might have been my loop antennas limiting me, and it might have been because there weren't very many operators in the area. I don't know. Comment if you know the answer to that. And so I don't feel like I've had a lot of success there, but also I didn't operate there very much because of my, I'm going to call it an abbreviated setup. I am a limited Rover Limited. And so because of that, I didn't really commit a lot of time to roving the grids and spending a lot of time on station operating. So I spent about 4 to 6 hours on Saturday and then 4 to 6 hours on Sunday operating from somewhere else. And, I guess I did all right. I made 17 voice contacts and 21 data or FT8 contacts. I could have done better, and I hope to do better in the future. My route might have had something to do with it as well. Just about an hour to the west of Louisa, there are a couple of mountain ridges that I could get up on, and that is elevation. And from there, I could probably make my signal go all the way back to the coast where I'm from. So I think operating location plays into it. Comment below if you know the answer to that. I'm working with this app. Well, it's not really an app. I'm just going to call it a website. It's, I can't remember the call signs. I will put the call signs up here in the corner to show you. But he basically has a spotting page to show where all the contesters are. But I can't call it all of them because it only will show the ones who are participating in it. And so when I look at Louisa, I was the only one there. But I'm not on this map here because I wasn't using the spotting page yet. But when I look at it, there are tons of spots up to the north of me, but almost nobody near me. So I don't know, am I in the wrong location or what? January is not well known for excellent propagation on the VHF bands, but it is said that the participation is much better in January than it is in September, because in January it's cold and people are cooped up in the house and they want to do something, and so they do participate. So participation may be up, although propagation is down. Let me know what you think of that. I'm hoping that with the beams and the higher antennas, even with less propagation, that maybe I will do better. I still will not have the 222 megahertz band at that point, but I do still plan to run from grids 0708, 1718, and that would be on Saturday, and then Sunday I would go down and work 16 and 26. 26 FM 26 being a bit of a rare grid because most of it's out in the ocean. If I see good success with that, if the beams make that big of a difference, then I'm going to go with something more expansive, a larger Rove that will take me to even more grid squares. We'll see how that goes. All right, so at this point I've been talking a whole lot longer than I anticipated. Let me know what you think of all of this contesting, my setup, my operating practices, which could be improved upon, and general tips and advice that you might have for me. For my Volkswagen followers, you hams who may not know this because you've never been to my channel before, my channel has been predominantly Volkswagen for the past 2 or 3 years. I can't remember how long I've been running the channel. And now I'm steering more into ham-related content. So if you're a Volkswagen owner and you're still here, thanks for watching. I feel like I've alienated you a little bit, but I've mentioned in other videos that this channel is going to go where my interests go. And right now my interests are going deeper into ham radio, amateur radio as it's legally known. If you're still here, thanks. Contact me if you're interested to know how to become a ham radio or amateur radio licensed operator. It's not terribly difficult, and yeah, depending on how deep you dive into it, it can be pretty fun. If you're a ham and you're here, welcome. Feel free to comment, email, whatever you'd like to do. Check out my other content. I do have a playlist. I will link the playlist up here for my ham-related content, and then I will put another link up for my non-communications electronics. I'll stick that up here as well. I appreciate you being here, and I will give you a follow-up as soon as I can. Take care.